Oh, hey, everybody. It is Romania Black, and we're on episode 16 of Frieren. I have been gone for a solid 10 days. It feels like it's been nearly 2 weeks since I've recorded episode 15. So it feels like it's been a while. And I have comments to talk about that have come from the last couple episodes, but it's great to be back. I've missed Frieren. I know for you all it doesn't seem like that long, but for me, it's been about 2 weeks, and it feels like a long time since I've watched the show. And when we last left off, it did feel like a good point to leave off because it was the big dance with Stark and Fern. It was Stark kind of like showing this lord that, you got to move forward and don't leave behind the ones that are right in front of you. And Stark kind of saying, like, yeah, I'm appreciative that you've given me this opportunity to stay with you all, but I've got an old man. I got to take my stories back too. And it was just so heartwarming and good. And now that Sein has joined the cast, I really like our Fab Four going forward. I'm not opposed to them getting more. I kind of thought about that. I was like, it kind of would be cool. Frieren, we'll talk about this in the comments that I have to start this intro out with, but Frieren is so she's taken so long to warm up to the idea of going back and getting a second chance to open up to people and to get to know her party that she maybe didn't do the first time around with Himmel and Hader and Eisen. But I'm kind of like, a part of me would like it to just stay four because there's that parallel and it syncs up. But then there's another part of me being like, well, what if they did get like a rogue or a thief to join? Or what if they did get a fifth or a sixth member? Like, what if the dynamic did change up so it wasn't like a repeat of before, but it was something different? I don't know if the story will commit to that or if that's going to be something that happens down the road. I don't know. So there is a big question about that. So I'm very curious to see where we go with it. And at this point, we have, we're kind of at the halfway point of the journey, sort of, which is weird to think that we're only halfway through the season. Technically, we still have 12 more episodes. So technically more than halfway, but it feels like a halfway point. I talked a few episodes ago. I don't know if we're going to get a new ED or OP. I feel like we will, and I feel like it's probably going to happen this episode, but I don't know. We'll see. Nobody's told me on Patreon to not watch it, so I'm assuming it'll be fine if there is a new OP-ED. I'm sure we can watch it. So I want to get to these comments. J.M. Hases says that as Sein tells Frieren in episode 13, as he tells Frieren in episode 13 that he's joining the party, Stark holds up a fish that he caught to Fern, and it's kind of like him signifying, hey, we've caught Sein, he's joined the crew, and I thought that was pretty cool. David Garcia notes in the ED that the floral imagery explains the characters in the song Anytime, Anywhere. Blue flowers are for Himmel, purple and gray for Fern and Frieren, and rust colors for Stark and Flom. I like that Stark and Flom are connected. I feel like they are this sense of warmth that is for both Frieren and for Fern, which is nice. Charles Baldwin noted the fight with Qual. How I did note a few episodes ago, I was like, I wonder when Frieren started flying. And Charles Baldwin noted that in the fight with Qual, he was surprised that Frieren was flying, which suggests that she's only learned it within the past 80 years since that initial fight. So after they fought the Demon King, Frieren was like, I need to learn how to fly. And we need to go from there. So that's good to kind of put two and two together and connect the threads. Kaku's mentioned twice here, but the first time is the manga. And look, here's the thing about the manga. Normally with reaction series, I don't want to know too much about the manga, only because I'm like, oh, I might read that. But I'll be honest, y'all, I am so swamped with extras that I've got like a whole list here of things I have not gotten to that are extras outside the channel. I'm not going to be tackling Frieren's manga anytime soon. I just don't think I will. There's too much going on. So I was fine with this. Kaku said that in the manga, during episode 1 and episode 12, there are little extra scenes with the ring that aren't in the manga, and it was mainly to hype up the manga readers to be like, oh, we're going to get to the ring. We're going to get to the ring in episode 14. And that's really what it was for. So I'm fine knowing that. I'll be honest, I probably am not going to read the manga for Frieren. One, I don't have time on my channel. And two, I really want to stay anime only because I have a feeling they're going to make a second season of this. I want to see that second season, and I want to watch it in anime format. So that's where I'm at. Alessi Colley said that band means gang woods, and obviously avian means birds. I know of the avian flu, so I was familiar with that too, but thank you. Alex Cornejo says that Himmel and Frieren, they are basically married. This comment sent me. Alex was like, well, they're basically married, Frieren and Himmel, and quote unquote, she can jump his literal bones anytime. Did I think that Frieren was going to get us into necromancy? No, but here we are. I shouldn't be surprised at this point. But that made me laugh really hard, so thank you. C. Davis talks about how maybe the Frieren, when she says maybe and she clinches the ring, is a pretty big deal in episode 14. And I agree. I think that Frieren slowly opening up emotionally to us is really fun with this series because, from the first couple of episodes, I was like, oh, this cold granny wench. And everybody was like, hold on, now just let it warm up on you. And we slowly are seeing that over time, which is really nice. Christopher Peterson noted that about Hader and Frieren and her being a tsundere. And yes, I have made notes. Frieren is such a tsundere, but the funny thing about it is that she is the most subtle tsundere I think I've experienced in a series. Like, she's such a tsundere, but she comes across it so nonchalant. And so, usually tsunderes are like, I don't want to talk about this. And they're just all like very, very emotional and outward about their tsundere-ness. And Frieren's a tsundere, but she's so calm and chill about it that you kind of just think that she's being socially awkward. And no, she's just a tsundere. And so it's like, wow, that's really well done. Now, before I get to Christopher Peterson's other comments, Kaku did say that the episode 15 dance was 100% hand-drawn. It wasn't used with rotoscope or CGI or anything like that, which is highly impressive. They shared a clip over on the Discord on Patreon of the animation happening, and it's so beautiful. And I, as a big fan of 2D animation, I greatly appreciate that. I mean, I like the advances that CGI has helped with, and I won't overlook those, but there's just something about just a 2D scene that you're like, just get into. I think the only other art form I maybe appreciate more is like claymation, because I've watched behind the scenes with claymation and I'm like, that's a lot of work. So I do appreciate the art form that goes into it. So that was really cool. So thank you, Kaku. And then Christopher Peterson has been catching up with the series, and I've been catching up with their comments and talking about, there's one thing about Frieren and this series that I absolutely love, especially considering that I am reading Berserk around the same time now as watching this series, especially considering I've watched Monster and Attack on Titan. And that is that Frieren, it focuses on the positives of humanity, but it does so in a way that doesn't come across as preachy or schmaltzy. For example, as Christopher notes, like, we know from Fern being orphaned and she lives in the South, it very well possibly wasn't a demon attack. It could have been a war between two human parties, because most of the demon attacks we know of are occurring in the North. But what I like about this series so much is that where some series, especially kind of the more medieval fantasy type series that I've seen so far, they focus so much on like, let's make this dark and gruesome and as despairing as possible. And instead, Frieren is so hopeful, and it's so full of joy and light and wholesomeness despite the darkness around them, that I really, really like it. I like it so much. And Christopher Peterson also said that, Frieren and elves live so long. Maybe it just took her 80 years to develop a crush. And I was like, oh my God, yes. It just took her so long to develop a crush in comparison to elven years. If Himmel had been, look, you know that meme? You know that meme where it's like the giant book, and then it's like, if this one thing happened, the book is like this big. This is Frieren Beyond Journey's End. This is Frieren Beyond Journey's End if Himmel had been born an elf. Himmel was born the wrong species. If he was just born an elf instead of a human, they could have developed that love over time. He'd still be alive. They'd go off and have little elf babies. We wouldn't have even had this story. So I'm anticipating the alternate universe fan fiction where that is the case, and we focus on them instead doing that. Like, can we have that? Can that be a case? Can somebody send me the link to that fan fiction in the Discord? I'd appreciate you 1,000 times over. But yeah. And then finally, I really like the idea that Flom may not have, the way that we interpret history and the way that Frieren kind of it elaborates to the audience that time changes our perceptions and how we contextualize history. And at the beginning, before we met Flom, it was like, oh, Flom, they introduced magic to the world. And then there's slowly this idea that maybe Flom didn't, but Flom gets credit because they might have advanced it or popularized it. So I like that as we're going, the narratives and the ways that we think about these characters are getting more layered. They're being recontextualized. They're being complicated. It's just a lot of fun. And it's what makes this series so enjoyable to dissect and go through. So yeah, so I've talked enough, but thank you for the comments, everybody. I really appreciate it. It makes me excited and makes it exciting to dive back into Frieren after being gone for a while. Because I was worried. I was like, oh, am I going to want to watch Frieren again? And as soon as I got home, I was like, yeah. So yeah. Episode 16, we're going to see what we get, right? But I'm very excited. I hope you all are as well. So we're not going to waste any more time. We're going to dive right in and just see what we get. But I'm going to reset this up. We're going to look at Frieren Beyond Journey's End. And we're going to start that here in 3, 2, 1. And let's do it to it. Well, that was an episode. A genuine cliffhanger from Frieren, and I don't know. I mean, the idea that they find out that the friend of Sein, who we'll talk about, is possibly in the opposite direction from which they want to go. And Sein said the reason he's joining them is to venture out and find his friend. I just got done saying that I really hope their party grows, but I don't want it to diminish. I don't know. Okay. So they are going to the city. They said that before they go any further into northern lands, they have to take an exam, right? So they have to go into the northern lands. They have to take an exam. So I thought that'd just be like a written test. It's like a GRE. They get there and they're like, oh, you just take this test and you stay there. But I mean, Frieren has no qualms staying in one place for a very long period of time, as we find out in this episode. But I feel like Fern is like, let's keep going. Like, Frieren, we can't stay here forever. We're not like you that are living for thousands of years. No. So I feel like, okay, we could take the test. And maybe while they are in the city taking the test, whatever that amounts to, maybe Sein can go and find his friend and then venture back and meet up with them. But here's the thing that's so crazy about it is that on the map, the town at the end seems really far away. Like it's not just, one thing I really appreciate about the show is they kind of definitely make the reality of travel on foot and how long that takes sink in, because it's taken them like a good solid year of traveling so far just to get to this one town that didn't look that far away on the map, but it's taken them a long time, like a year, to get there. And granted, they were stuck a couple months in the snow where they met Kraft, but on the map, it looks like, oh, well, he'll just be gone a couple days and he'll just come right back. No, the way that the map presents, it's like if Sein goes on this quest to this city to find his friend who may not even still be there, he may, it may take him months. It may take him a year to get there and back. And I don't think Frieren and them are going to be stuck in that city getting their exam for a year. So I'm so scared that we just met Sein. He's this really cool character, and he may already be leaving the group next episode to go find his friend, and we won't have him anymore. But then I kind of freak out because I'm like, wait, we established we need a priest. So I'm like, if we don't have him, we're going to need a priest to move forward, right? So who's going to replace him? Is anybody replacing him? So I'm genuinely in a situation of shock with this show now because I don't know what they're going to do. I'm like, how are we going to handle this? So I guess we're going to find out next episode. I don't know if I'm going to be able to wait to watch the next episode, if I'm being honest. I'm obviously going to try to wait a little bit, but I don't know how long that's going to be. So, as I'm playing with my dog, who is demanding that I throw this toy to him, and he's growling. You probably can hear that. As that's happening, we need to go through this episode because this episode almost made me cry. Again, I was like, no, show, don't you dare. I think if the show had drawn out the experience with Vol to the end of the episode, I think it might have got me crying, but luckily it didn't do that, and they have other fish to fry. So that is one thing I do appreciate about Frieren, and it's probably why the emotional beats hit harder than most shows, is because it's not drawn out. It's not overdrawn. It's not this big, like, we're going to make you wait the entire episode and create this like fake sense of suspense. And this show treats its readers very intelligently and its viewers very intelligently. And it doesn't draw it out, making go, oh, I wonder what's going to happen. No, it cuts to the point. And sometimes, though, that cut is so sharp that it just, like, stabs you. And you're like, oh, no, didn't imagine that. Like, it happens in this episode. There's a moment where it just goes, and you just, like, get the knife in the chest. And you're like, oh, crap. Okay. And it just hits you, right? It's kind of insane. So let's dive into this episode and talk about the fishing with Sein and Gorilla Warrior, the mage that'll take his picture. Look, I'm sorry. I'm reading Berserk right now as we talked in the intro. The Gorilla Warrior, he looks like guts. He just looks like guts. And I know it's a direct reference. It has to be. Even down to the point where he wants to be the warrior with the sword. Like, okay, so Kraft in the statue, Kraft has a big old, like, guts berserk type sword. I don't think that Kraft had that in the episode where they meet him. Could be wrong. But I'm like, okay, so Gorilla Warrior wants to be like Kraft. Okay. Fair. And Sein wants to be like the mysterious goatee priest who is not mentioned. Now I want to know. I I joked in the reaction, but I'm like, maybe Kraft wasn't interested in Frieren, not because they hadn't had time to get to know each other, but maybe Kraft's not into lady elves. Fuel my BL love show. Keep it going. Keep it going. Yeah, maybe Kraft's not into the lady elves, and we've just been wrong this whole time. I don't know. I am curious. No, now I want to know about Kraft and the priest. Now I want to know about them. But look, I was having a flashback not only of Berserk with the Gorilla Warrior looking like guts, but also the fact that him reaching out to Sein and like grabbing his hand, and it's very dramatic. And there's like the wind. He like slowly walks towards Sein under the tree. What it reminded me of was a recent season of Bungo Stray Dogs. And in that series, I'm not going to spoil anything, but there are two male characters that have a kind of similar moment to this. A little similar. It's a little similar, but it's very melodramatic, maybe a little homoerotic. I'm all here for it. But yeah, so the mage that takes the photos. I want to know, who is he? I want to know about the mage takes photos because he's been in a few scenes now. They've talked about how photos are not a common thing in this world. Stark brings it up. He's like, oh, photos. You don't see that very often. Fern has one. And Sein has one. I'm like, is there a commonality between all of this? Is there a thread linking these people together? Who is this mage that can take photos? We don't get to see his face. And the fact that the show doesn't show us his face, to me, seems like it would be something important. So we're just going to file that away. But the scene where Gorilla Warrior grabs Sein and lifts him off his feet, his hair like blows in the wind. He looks so pretty, like in his younger form with the long hair. I feel like if Sein let his hair go and took it out of the ponytail, he'd look really good. But yeah, just the idea. Now look, do I think Gorilla Warrior is in love with Sein? No, I think that they're just friends. Do I think Sein maybe our bisexual king of Frieren? Yeah, I think so. But that's just my opinion. But yeah, he's like carrying on the locket with his bestie in there. Yeah, I get those vibes. I'm getting vibes between Sein and Gorilla Warrior. He's sitting in front of the flames. He clearly is sad because he can't see his best friend. Also, I want to point out that as he's looking ahead in the fire, there is like Stark on one side, and I'm guessing it's Frieren or Fern or both on the other side. There's a path that goes straight ahead, and then there's a little path that goes to the side. And I'm like, is it Sein being like, do I leave these guys to go find my friend like I want to, or do I stay with them? I don't know. I think that if the show wants to conveniently give Sein like a leeway, it's this exam thing, but then I can't. I'm so conflicted about that because I feel like the journey to go to where Sein wants to go is going to take longer than the exam. And so then what do we do about that? So, like I said, I don't know if I'm going to be able to wait before I watch the next episode because I want to know what happens between them. Anyway, we didn't get a new OP, which is surprising to me, but we also haven't met the elf that's in the place with the books. There's books everywhere, a big throne, and them just sitting there. I can't tell. Okay, so I'm looking at I didn't want to look too close to the elven character that's left. Are they a woman? They look like maybe they have boobs in the picture. I thought they were male, but they could be a woman. Could be a woman and we just don't know yet. I don't know. I don't know, but see, my thought earlier on in the season was that there was going to be a new Demon King, that they defeated, obviously, the Demon King from 80 years ago, and a new one was trying to take its place. And I thought that maybe this elven character with all the smut surrounding them could be the new Demon King, but I don't know. I feel like there's that one loose thread to know about before we can move on. So we'll just have to see. Okay. Meanwhile, Frieren is in such good spirits. Frieren is in the best of spirits. They're in such a good mood throughout most of this episode. They're like the most cheerful we've ever seen Frieren, which is really fun to see. But also the fact that she's so eager to just spend 10 years with Vol, and Fern's like, no, a week tops. We're not spending 10 years. We have places to go, things to see. I like that Fern has to keep Frieren on track. Otherwise, she would easily waste away, and it's not waste, but spend 10 years somewhere just thinking about it, right? Because that's just how time works for Frieren. And Fern's like, that's not how time works for us. I'll be nearly 40 by the time we get out of here. No. But I was a little confused during the reaction, and then it finally clicked when we got the flashback with Himmel and the others. But so Vol is a dwarf who protected the village for almost 400 years. So I thought that Frieren had met Vol a long time ago, but that's not the case. She just met him 80 years ago whenever the party was going through. So that's what it is. She didn't know, which is kind of sad. At first I was like, how did Frieren know a dwarf from all this time ago? Wasn't she supposed to be in hiding? She was. She just met him along their journey, right? He just happened to be older when he met her. And although she says they've been looking at it and they're like, what's the life expectancy for dwarves? And Sein says about 300 years. So Vol has lived long beyond that. Although seeing Vol in this episode gives me a lot of hope that Eisen might be still alive by the time they get home, because Vol looked a lot older than Eisen. A lot older. So, I mean, I gauged Eisen to be like 150 years old at the most, or like 200 years old. But Vol has lived a really long time. She's like, he's a long-lived friend of mine. So not a long-time friend of hers, but a long-lived friend. That's the key. She's like, I want to chat with him before he dies. And I feel for Stark in this episode on a number of fronts. First of all, when Stark's like, hey, let's not talk about old dwarves that are reaching the end of their lifespan dying and you getting to talk to them before their deaths, because that's what I'm trying to do with these stories. So, yeah. I also wonder now, I talked in the past about, Frieren is going to heaven to see Himmel, and Fern is going to heaven to see Hyder. And Sein, I thought, was going to go to heaven to see his guerrilla warrior friend that he thought was dead, but that doesn't seem to be the case anymore. I thought Stark, like the cruel twist of fate would be Stark gets to heaven and then Eisen is there as well, and he's like, you died, But I actually think now there's a high possibility that Stark is just going to go to heaven, hear about the stories that Fern heard from Hyder, and then he's going to go back to tell Eisen about Hyder, who Eisen would want to know about. And then Fern's going to like beat him to the punch and be telling him about it instead. And Stark's going to be like, but all these stories. And then him and Eisen are going to make up and have their moment. That's what I think anyway. But yeah, I like the idea that they bring up that Frieren doesn't have a lot of people she can talk about the past with anymore. That it's really just herself, Eisen, this guy Vol, but unless they're dwarves, she doesn't really have anybody left to talk to about the past, unless they're dwarves or elves. And she didn't really hang out with any elves, and she didn't really hang out with any dwarves, because unless they were like met on the way to fight the Demon King. So she doesn't have a lot of people she can talk to, right? And so any opportunity Frieren has to connect with somebody, she wants to take advantage of. And so she's just so happy. She's like, yes, this detour. I just love seeing Frieren with a smile on her face, looking so pleased as Punch, even though she says she wants to stay there 10 years. She just has to be a little bit trolling, right? Just a wee bit. So they get to Vol. I like that Stark helps Fern off the log. It's really cute. And they're like having these little adventures. It's sweet. And they manage to make it there. And Sein's just kind of like looking around and sees the big golden tree. And this is the village that he's protecting and has protected for 400 years. I also like that he has the little sword. Now, here's the thing. He has a little sword there that he used as a warrior. It seems very similar to the sword that Kraft used as a warrior. I'm not saying it's the same one. I'm just saying it's a similar type of sword, right? But I like the subversion. Of course, everybody thinks that Frieren and Vol are, just old grannies, old seasoned warriors, and they end up showing that they can prove their might even at an old age. Yeah, when Stark doesn't fail to kill the bear thing and then Vol's stabbed it, it's like, okay, he still got it, good. But poor Stark, secondly, he gets knocked out by the man, gets chided for almost losing a leg, and then all Frieren says is, okay, Stark, you're gonna train with him now. It's great. The thing that makes it so heartbreaking in this moment, though, in hindsight, is Frieren, she was like, okay, old man, you can quit pretending to be senile. And he does quit pretending to get Stark off his game. But then later when they're sitting there, and we'll talk about it later, when he's sitting there talking to her and he suddenly has a senile moment and she just looks and goes, okay. She just accepts it. And that's the part that broke my heart, was that she just accepts that it's happening and that his memory is fading. And I was just like, oh no. Because my best friend is a social worker, and she worked at a geriatric facility for her internship in grad school, where she worked with populations with Alzheimer's. And one of the things they tell you is that if somebody has an Alzheimer episode and they are repeating something or they're not sure where they are, the last thing you want to do is try to correct them, because that will just end up confusing them. And the way that she said they learned in the facility is at that point, when it's affecting people's memory, you don't want to confuse someone. It's about quality of life. So if it's not hurting anyone, going along with it is fine, because what good is it to correct them at that point? They're probably going to forget later. You're just going to make them angry or confused. Just go on with it and let it go. And for a split second, Frieren was going to correct him and be like, oh, we've already stopped the Demon King. And then she's like, yeah, we're going to go do that. And it just broke my heart. I was like, no, this elderly dwarf with Alzheimer's. I'm like, no, it just really gutted me. And I was like, oh, damn show. You're just shiv it right up there. Get that knife right in there. That's not the only reason this knife is driven into our souls this episode. But yeah, he said carelessness is the greatest weakness of demons and people. I think it's interesting that the little medallion that he carries, it doesn't seem to have the symbol that we see with a lot of the insignia. It's not the sword with the wings. It's a different insignia. So that's interesting. I like it a lot. But Frieren seems so proud that they found Vol and that he's going to teach Stark. She's so happy about it. Christopher Peterson was noting in their comments that Stark probably gets the brunt of the abuse in this series because he is a warrior, and mages are kind of like glass cannons, and warriors need to be tanks that can take damage in a fantasy story. But I feel so bad for Stark. I especially feel bad because he's like, I can't walk. This old man did me in. And then she's like, you're welcome to make yourself at home. Oh, a heck of an old man. So then we have the one guy. I thought that maybe we were going to have more with this farm guy that works on the farm, but he's literally just a hired hand. And they tell them that in the village, everybody's either busy or can't do things. So getting the work to take the vegetables and stuff out is a big help. I just like that a lot of the magic that is used in Frieren is for mundane things like gardening and harvesting. It's very organic, And I kind of like the idea it applies the sense of something supernatural to something more earthy and tied to nature. I like that a lot, actually. It's great. And they're like, no one else would take the job, so it is appreciated. And they're like, old man Vole doesn't normally have friends or converse with someone happily. I just love the idea that Stark's just sitting there training the whole time. And Frieren's like, just keep it up. And then she's talking with Vole. She's having such a great time. I love that Frieren, she just lights up seeing the opportunity to reconnect with someone that she knows from long ago and to keep those memories and those stories going. It's so sweet. We see a lot of older characters in this episode, like with the stubborn old woman, with Vole, with Frieren, and seeing how they keep the stories and memories going. He protected the village from monsters and demons for years, and we find out it's because of his wife. But he's been alone this whole time, which is really sad. Like, I felt for Vole being all by himself for hundreds of years after his wife's passed. It very is akin to Frieren. And it's like, that's why I kind of wanted Frieren, you know, as much as I love the love story of Himmel and Frieren, a part of me is like, you know, if she was an immortal human, I'd be like, okay, well, you can move on and love other people. You don't have to be tied to this ghost of Himmel forever. But then the other part of me is like, she's an elf. So one, the concept of time is different for her. And two, she's just now grieving after nearly 100 years, right? She's just now having a moment of grief. So then we see Stark carrying this boulder. It's a very Yoda moment from Star Wars. Him carrying Vole on the boulder up the hill. He's probably used to it with Ison, though. So, you know. And then they have the steak. It looks like a whole entire chicken. They're eating like an entire chicken whole with some potatoes and carrots and some rolls. And poor Stark is just like famished. I do love the little moment of Fern like getting the plate from him, and then we see Sein like putting him on his back and carrying him to bed. The whole time Frieren is just chatting with Vole. She doesn't even care what's happening beside her. She's like, I don't care, I'm talking to this old man. Like, she's so riveted communicating with this person that she's known from long ago and re-listening to his stories and her time with Himmel and them. She doesn't even notice the others and what they're doing, right? And then there's the scene after the fishing scene where they're still talking with the mushrooms. And I love the colors of the green lights and everything as they're gathering. Now, if you notice in the scene, like Frieren, she's hanging out with Vole. They're having a good time. She's like, look at the mushrooms. Stark is gathering them all up in the basket, and him and Fern are having a conversation. If you look over, Stark has his back turned. Or Sein, not Stark. Sein has his back turned. Like, Sein is there, but his mind is elsewhere. So I feel like as Frieren is reconnecting with her old friend, it's just reminding Sein more and more that he's kind of isolated in this moment, and he's not reconnecting with his friend, and that's kind of the whole reason he went on the journey, right? And then, yeah, Stark, the bear getting killed by Vole, and he has his little eyes closed. It's really cute. It's cutesy. And then Frieren and him just walking along, having a great time. And they're like, oh, well, humans develop quickly. He's fine. And she's like, I had fun, old man Vole, and I'm grateful to you now. She's like, I was able to reconnect and re-remember. You're the reason I got to know Himmel and the others. So, yeah. And the thing about it is, she says that, and I don't think he quite realizes what she says. And at first, you're like, well, she met Himmel and the others before they went on this quest. So what does she mean he's the reason? And the fact that he told Himmel the reason he protects the village is that because it's his wife. It was something that mattered to his wife. I'm just defending the village that my wife loved. And he can't remember her voice or her eyes or what she looked like. But he's like, I made long ago a promise to a human. And seeing like how infatuated he was with her. And Himmel immediately, Himmel, the romantic hero, our romantic Himmel, takes that to heart immediately, because it's like the gears are turning in Himmel's head, and he's like, oh my god, you were a dwarf that fell in love with a human, but she died so young in comparison to you that the only thing you knew how to do to keep her memory alive was to take care of the village, because that village represents her. And Himmel, of course, is thinking, I'm a human. I'm only going to be around for so long, but I want Frieren to carry my memory, and I want my love to be etched into Frieren's heart so that she doesn't forget. It's like, Swoon! Swoon! Himmel continues to be perfect. And I'm like, son of a bitch. He's like, I can't describe her face or her voice or her eyes, but this village and protecting it is my memory alone. And to Frieren, she's just like, okay. But Himmel's like, oh my God. And because Vol says it's silly, isn't it? I've been keeping a promise I made to a dead woman. And Himmel's like, I'm going to make Frieren keep a promise to me. Because he does. Because I think in that moment, Himmel's like, eventually, you know, we have all these poses being done, all these statues being made. You know, the statues are a way that Himmel decides that's how Frieren's going to remember what I look like. She's going to remember my face and my eyes and my hair because of the statue. I'm going to do all these statues and put them around so she can't forget about me. But the memory of his voice and him talking to her, he's like, she will eventually forget that maybe. Because this man forgot it and he was in love with his wife. But he eventually forgot. So he's like, I have to find a way to make sure she doesn't forget me. I'm like, oh. And I just love the gears turning in Himmel's head as he's thinking about this. He's like, no, I figured out what I'm going to do. He's like, you're right. God, I love the animation of this scene. I'm sure she's glad you're keeping your promise. Himmel's like, yeah, I would be glad if Frieren kept her promise to me. And Vol's just like, you're a good hero, Himmel. Look at you. Oh, I'm sure you'll defeat the Demon King. It's like, my wife wished to see an era of peace that comes after the defeat. Which has happened, so that's always good, right? I'll carry the memory of the great hero Himmel into the future. And Himmel's like, oh, I appreciate it. You don't have to do that because Frieren's going to do that. Because I like Eisen's like, hey, I'm not living as long as an elf and I'm not carrying your memory. And he's like, no, Frieren's going to. And then at the time, because Frieren's crush has not developed, you know, yet by elf standards, she's like, okay, sure, I guess. She's like, fine, I guess. And Vol's like, you've been blessed with good companions if they'll keep your memory alive. And then Himmel's like, well, I'll have to show you the collection of handsome poses that I came up with for all my statues. I love he always swishes his hair whenever he does it. Like, he's so vain. And she's like, maybe I won't remember you. But then she thinks back, and I love that she opens her eyes. She's like, I probably didn't need that collection of handsome poses after all. She's like, did I need to remember that? Did I need to make space in my brain if I just had that one memory? And then I love that look that she has when she is thinking about Himmel so fondly. The look on her face is the most in love look that we have seen Frieren have. And if you told me in episode 1 that she would have a look like this, I'd be like, she doesn't seem like she'd be capable of that. But here she is. She looks so in love in that moment with him. And that's when this conversation, when Vol starts it, and he's like, do you remember his face? And of course she does, because she has all the statues of him. She's like, of course I do. And then he says, what about his voice? And then she kind of goes, like she does in her head, but it's like, your memory can trick you. So it's like, she's like, yes. And she's like, don't insult me. Like you have your issues with memory, so do I. But she's like, we both love someone, so don't be that way. She's like, I remember everything. Himmel's the reason I decided I would get to know people. Like your reason for defending the village. Yeah, and just like him defending the village, her getting to know people and opening up to people is her way of keeping Himmel alive in her memory. She's like, it's important to me. And he's like, oh, that's your reason. So you have a reason as well. And he's like, I can't remember anymore. I don't remember anything about her. And I just love it. He's like, but I continue defending this village for an important something. Because it's for her, for the concept of her. And I like that Frieren kind of like listens to him about it. And just kind of realizes that, yeah, eventually, she's like, you're quite the jokester, old man Vol. She's like, you love him. And at that moment, this is the part that gets really complicated because she's like, yeah, she understands as well as anybody that memories fade and history changes and we forget things over time. But she's like, oh, but you love your wife, so you can't quite forget her all the way, right? And then it hits her during this conversation that his memory is slipping. She's like, we're heading to the lands where the Demon King's castle is. Not exactly the Demon King's castle. But when he says here, he's like, you're finally off to defeat the Demon King. That part got me. Because not the way he said it, but the way he's like, I hope that brings peace to the land. The way that she just stops and stares at him, like realizes that his memory is slipping and he's starting to forget things. Oh, that gutted me. That was like, cluck, 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 arrows all around. I was like, nope. No, sir. That is not what I wanted. That just, that gutted me. And he's just so peaceful in that moment. And she starts to say that the Demon King is dead, but then the wind blows and she kind of like stops herself. And it's honestly one of the few times we see her scared or surprised. And she stops and she kind of like slowly goes, no. She's like, I came here knowing that this man likely would die. We're just gonna go on. We're just gonna move on. I'm not gonna do that to him. I'm not gonna insult him. She's like, I'll carry your memory into the future too. At this point, Frieren's so used to everybody she loves dying around her. It's so tragic. I hate it. I hate it. But you know what? If Vol has to die so that Eisen lives, I'll take it. And she's like, take care, old man Vol. And she turns back around to him. And he's like, I dreamed of my wife. And he's like, maybe it's because you and I reminisced about the past. So like his memory's not fully gone. He still was able to think about her. And she's like, okay, he's still there. Her seeing him later. I hope she comes back on the way back and sees him. But he might not be there, and that's really, really sad. Kills me. Kills me. That first half of the episode was just knife gutted right there. So anyway, they go back to Roar Roads, and they find this guy who has Luffy the Pirate King's hat. And Sai's slowly getting information about the Gorilla Warrior. And then he's like, that's why I'm on this journey. And I like that Stark's like, I thought it was to travel with a sexy older woman. For a hot second, I thought the old lady in the cottage was going to turn out to be the sexy older woman. No, I feel like that is a mild excuse just to be with them. But he's actually here to find his bestie Gorilla Warrior, to reunite with him from 10 years ago. So we don't see photos very often in this world by a mage who visited my village long ago. Yeah, so again, the mage that is able to take pictures with his little digital cane. I want to meet said man. I feel like it's the same one that took Fern's family's photos. Interesting. And so they keep heading north to go find him. But he has a name that anybody can remember, which is the Gorilla Warrior. And they were best friends. But it's interesting that he doesn't recall his original name, just the nickname. That was tying to me back to the series Monster. In that series, there is, in Monster, for example, there is a lot of talk about how names define us and how people remember us for our names and for the labels that get attached to those names. So Gorilla Warrior is it seems so generic, but it's also so simple that it's something that is easily remembered. So he's like, I'll become this warrior that people remember over time. Like Kraft. Kraft's an easily remembered name, right? Stark is an easily remembered name. So it's nothing complicated. So I like this idea that our names can transcend who we are, and that be our legacy, and that be etched in history more so than anything else about us or what we do, right? So Frieren's like, oh, well, did people call you goatee priest before you could even develop a goatee? And he's like, shut up. That was all hater. That was all the corrupt priest's business. He's like, and so they get to a village. What's interesting is they're like, once we cross the canyon and walk for about a week, we'll be in the city. What's so fascinating is that Sein makes the decision to want to stop in this little village and ask. He's like been asking at every little village. And you can't say it's like a plot convenience because they have been stopping every little place. But it is such a coincidence that the last village they stopped to is the one that has the lead. it's almost like it's fate, right? And I wonder if that's going to determine his decision, whether or not he leaves or not, being like, I just happened by this one village by chance before we got to the big city. And because it almost seems like the city that they're heading to is like that checkpoint. Once they reach there and they take the exam, then they're going to be on their way to heaven, and it's going to be like kind of an all or nothing, here we go sort of scenario. And I feel like Scien's like, I want to try to find my friend before I get to that city, before I get close, so I can get closure before we go on that journey, because otherwise it's going to like drive me crazy thinking about it for as many years as we might be on the journey to heaven. So it's like, ugh. So I could see why he might want to leave before they get there, because then he can find and make peace with his friend and catch up to them. I don't know. But I like that Frieren's like, okay, we're just going to spend a little bit of time in the city. And Fern's like, yes, not 10 years in the one place. And he said, the road branches here, so let's go to this village first and check it out. I like the little kids playing sword, and one has the cape and one doesn't. And they're dyeing all of the clothes. And that's when they're told to like go look up in the house. They're like, he defeated a monster that appeared near the village. And I wonder if the two kids, if one of them are imitating the monster and one of them are imitating the gorilla warrior with the cape. We don't know what he looks like now, but it's like he was close with the stubborn old woman on the plateau. Stubborn old woman. I find it interesting that gorilla warrior was friends with the old woman, but maybe he knew that Sein liked older ladies and he'd seek her out if he came to the village. Maybe he found solace in her. Maybe he ended up kind of like being magnetized to her because of all the help she needed, and he could fulfill that. We don't know. But she sends them on a quest. You need to perform tasks for me. Deliver this letter. I love that Frieren's so excited. She's like, oh, we used to do this stuff all the time. Himmel used to deliver letters everywhere and do little odd tasks, and we just follow him around helping the villages while we were on our quest. The funny thing is, she looks back with such fondness to those moments, and she's so giddy about it. But then when you go back to the moment and you see Himmel being like, here is your letter, milady, Frieren's in the background like she just seems so bored. But in hindsight, she was really nostalgic for it. Again, you talk about memories. And then she's like, it always turned into troublesome searches or monster hunts. That's what she liked. She liked the fact that it became monster hunts and they got to go like search for spells and stuff. I like that we cut to like this dragon getting this pillar, and there's Hader and Eisen together, and then Himmel like has Frieren over his shoulder. Come on now. And they're like, don't jinx us. So I like that Stark ends up being the one to pass off the letters, and Sein does as well. And then they gather up all of the apples. When they found the flower on the cliffside, there is a plot line in Yona of the Dawn that is exactly that, and kind of like Fern Gully. And that's exactly what it reminded me of. So that was really cute. And then, yeah, they chase the chickens for the eggs. That part was ridiculous. And then poor Stark defeating the goat lion and just collapsing. Freaking hilarious. And then the old woman, like, it's almost like it's a test to see if she will open up to them after doing all of the odd jobs for her. And I like that Frieren says, when Frieren says Himmel or Hader could have gotten her to open up in half a day, I was like, but that's so funny because Hader and Himmel were so outgoing and communicative and talkative. And with the exception of Sein and kind of Stark, Fern and Frieren are really introverted and withdrawn, so they're not exactly communicative. They all are kind of socially awkward in their own way, so it's not like the bubbly personality of Hader or Himmel. And then she takes him. I feel again like it was a test to see if they're ready to polish the hero statue in the canyon. And she's like, the statue of heroes who saved the world a long time ago. Now, they're forgotten heroes and no one even knows their name, but the village has looked after it for generations. Now, the thing about it is, he says to her that he is the goatee priest, like she asked, but her response to it isn't like, oh, he told us you'd be here, all this. Instead, she looks kind of like a little sad that he's there, or a little like, you arrived too late, or something like that. She doesn't seem, it's hard to gauge what she's feeling in that moment about him saying that. But they get down the stairs to the base where there's the statue. of Craft and the man with the spell book. What's the priest and a warrior? So yeah, that's interesting. We were just talking about Craft needing a priest back in the previous episodes, and Craft seemed to know a little bit of priest magic, so it's apparent he learned it from this priest who's very handsome with the little goatee. I'm just saying, I feel like this priest and Craft were pretty tight. I'm just saying, I could be wrong, but that's what I'm assuming. So I want to know more about Craft and the priest. I want to know their backstory. I want to know what happened. He seemed like he's human, so he must have died. Does Craft mourn that? Is he committed to being isolated because of that? And then, yep, it looks just like him. And so Sein remembers the statue. He's like, this person's name is Craft, and they don't know the priest's name. But he remembers the statue from long ago when Hyder showed them a similar one of the two of them, and Guerrilla Warrior said that it looked like them. Now, does the priest look exactly like Sein? Yeah, a lot like Sein. Maybe a little bit more like lean than Sein is, but definitely looks like him. Does Craft look like the Guerrilla Warrior? No, not to me in particular. I think it's literally just the hairstyle. The Guerrilla Warrior just styles his hair like Craft, but I don't think they look similar at all otherwise. But he's like, I'm going to be an unforgettable hero like Himmel. And Hyder's like, look, even the best heroes, their names are eventually forgotten. I mean, it would help if they had, carved the names of the hero onto the base of the statue. That could have been helpful to remember said name, but I'm not the designer. I didn't do the architecture here. I'm just saying, if you make a little plaque with Himmel and them's name on it, maybe there was originally and it got knocked off. Who's to know? Who's to know? I did think it was cute whenever he was like, if I work really hard to get this big, is it going to work? That was sweet. But yeah, he's like, that's my name is Guerrilla Warrior. I like that shot of, you see the picture of Craft and then the Guerrilla Warrior below it. That's a very thumbnail worthy picture. But yeah, he's like, I want to become an unforgettable hero, so I need a memorable name. And Hyder finds it funny. But yeah, I swear, the one priest looks a lot like Sein. So yep, they clean it up. And interestingly enough, Frieren says if it was a bronze statue, they could have used magic. So apparently magic is conducted through bronze. Who knew? But because it was a stone statue, they had to use traditional cleaning supplies. Like, his only strength was fighting, but his name sure was memorable. He talked about you a lot. I love that we see a little bit of him, like, being older. He said the two of you would become heroes whose names would be remembered forever. And then he's just kind of like, Science like, well, that's great and all, but where is he? So as he's leaving the house, he looks very somber and morose. And Frieren's like, uh-oh, what does this mean? He's like, did you figure out where Gorilla went? And he's like, to Tur. So it's a trading city in the middle of the northern lands. So yeah, it's kind of like they established where they're at. They're at Clar and they're at Roar right now. So where they're at on the map, they need to go like a week that way to get to Auburst. But then they need to go like up here to get to Tur. So they're not close at all. They've got to go to Offen. And then from Offen, it's a long ways east from here. It's in the opposite direction from the city they need to go to. And he's like, yeah. And then he's like, so what am I going to do? Oh, that's so cruel. How dare they end it there? Because, yeah, it's like he finally gets a lead on where his friend is. And they need to talk. And I want him and the Guerrilla Warrior to get closure. I want that. But I'm like, I also don't want him to separate from Frieren and them because we just got them as a group. And it's like, but as this episode has shown, he's been worried about his friend this whole time. Is he going to be in the right mindset to move forward unless he goes and sees his friend? Probably not. But the Taurus in me, damn it, doesn't like change. And I don't like him splitting up from the group. So, but you know what? If they've got to go do this exam in the city, Who knows? I, again, thought it was like a written test. But who knows if there could be shenanigans happen as per Frieren. Maybe he will get... But it looked a long, far away place to get to that city. But maybe since it's like, if here's the one city over here, and here's the city that, you know, that Sein's going to, it is north, it's just northeast. So maybe after they get done taking the exam, they can head towards the city that Sein's at and meet him up there and then go from there. I would like to think that would be a possibility, but I don't know. I don't think I'm going to be able to wait for episode 17 because I'm going to need to find out what happens. But I'm going to try to wait until I can see the comments for these last few episodes and then go from there. Or at least for episodes 14 and 15 and then go from there. So I'm super excited to hear your thoughts down below. I hope y'all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll be back very soon with more Frieren Beyond Journey's End. Bye!